What's up everyone, I'm Tin from TinMax and welcome to our first video of 2024. What's a better way to start off the year on this channel than with a video about a game I should have talked about like 2 months ago. Persona 5 Tactica. Honestly, I kinda debated doing a video about Tactica at all. It's a pretty straightforward spin-off of Persona 5 after all. Would there really be enough for me to talk about? Also, I was only able to finally finish it a week ago because I originally played it thanks to a trial of Game Pass, and when that ran out I didn't have a way to play the game until I got it for Christmas, so there's that too I guess. Well, now I've experienced pretty much everything the game has to offer, and I do think it's worth talking about. I clearly enjoyed the game enough to platinum it, so that's gotta count for something, right? Plus, Persona 3 Reload is right around the corner, and I need something to talk about in the meantime, so with all that rambling out of the way, let's get right into it. Persona 5 Tactica is yet another spin-off entry in the spin-off series that is Persona. Specifically a spin-off of Persona 5. Yeah, I know that's pretty obvious, but I feel like I had to mention it just in case. You know how people can be. Tactica is the 4th Persona 5 spin-off and the 6th Persona 5 game overall if you count Royal, which you should. My math may be a little off on that, but I'm not gonna double check. Similar to Strikers, Tactica takes the gameplay and world of Persona 5 and applies it to a completely different genre. Less so a completely different genre this time around, but still. Strikers turned Persona 5 into a Dynasty Warriors type real-time action game, and while it did blend in a bunch of aspects from Persona's typical gameplay, it was still a pretty big departure genre-wise and not for everyone. The story was like going on a road trip with old friends you haven't seen in a while, and was overall pretty great, up until the end at least. I still really enjoyed it for the most part. Strikers is a pretty good sequel to Persona 5, and while Tactica isn't a full sequel, technically, it is another follow-up to Persona 5 and another entry in the Persona catalog. So, how does it stack up? I'm gonna try to avoid comparing Strikers and Tactica too much, but I do think some comparison is justified. In my mind, they both fall into the same category of game, and therefore drawing comparisons between the two just makes sense. They both take the standard Persona gameplay and translate it to another genre, and they both do it to great success. That being said, Tactica does have one advantage over Strikers. After all, Tactica is a tactical RPG in the style of XCOM or Mario Rabbids, and yes, those are the two examples I'm using. This means that Tactica shares the turn-based nature of the original Persona 5 compared to Strikers, which is a real-time action game. The similar gameplay between the two could make this game a little bit more accessible for fans, considering the genre difference is less significant. Personally, I had never played a tactics game before, so when Tactica was first announced, I was actually pretty interested to try it out just for that reason alone. Also, more Persona 5 is never going to be an issue with me, so there's that too. Like seriously, Persona 5 Arena when? Now before we get into the gameplay and story aspects of the game, I actually want to talk about something else first, the art style. Tactica takes the world and style of Persona 5 and chibifies it, and to be completely honest, I don't love it. Or at least I didn't love it. It eventually grew on me. I understand the decision to switch up the art style for this game. I think the more cartoony presentation fits the cartoony nature of the gameplay. The overall look of the game works really well during the combat sections, but the chibi look of the characters didn't necessarily vibe with me outside of that. I think by the time the credits were rolling I had grown fond of it, and I think a big part of that is the character designs for the new characters and the fact that the few animated cutscenes the game has are really well done. The 3D animated cutscenes don't really do the art style any favors in my eyes, but again, there weren't many of them. I loved the design of Arena, and I feel she fits in perfectly with the Phantom Thieves. The look and design of some of the spoiler stuff later in the game is also pretty sick, but you know, spoilers. Basically, the chibi look is never my favorite. However, I think Tactica made the right call by embracing it, even if I didn't love it at first. Well, now that I'm done rambling about whatever that was, let's talk about the gameplay and the combat. Like I mentioned earlier, the turn-based combat of base Persona 5 translates really well to the turn-based tactics combat Tactica employs. Atlus managed to incorporate the unique aspects of Persona 5's gameplay into this game in ways that feel mostly natural and consistent. The one more mechanic returns, but instead of being tied to targeting an enemy's weakness, it's tied to whether or not your target is in cover. For both the Phantom Thieves and the Legionnaires that make up the majority of the enemies, being in cover reduces the amount of damage taken when attacked. Targets not behind cover are vulnerable, and when attacked, trigger one more, giving whoever hit them an extra move. This obviously provides a strategic advantage, but also allows you to use this game's variation of an all-out attack called the triple threat. Not only does the triple threat look cool as hell, but it also is super satisfying to pull off, especially when used to take out a large number of enemies all at once. Each character has a ranged attack, a melee attack, and the use of their persona, except for Arena, who just kinda has persona powers anyway. Each character also has their own skill tree that plays into their different strengths. In a pretty significant change from the typical Persona formula, the main character doesn't have the ability to switch personas at will. Rather, Tactica incorporates the sub-persona mechanic from the Q games. For those of you who don't know, sub-personas basically allow every teammate to equip a second persona along with their base one, getting the skills and abilities of both. I love the sub-personas and was so happy to see it show up here. One of my favorite things about Atlas games is the fusion system. The inclusion of sub-personas adds a whole new level to it. Now you're not just fusing personas to fit what the main character needs, but what all the other characters need as well. Building the perfect set of personas to match what each character does well is super rewarding. Admittedly, this is something the Q games do better, simply because each persona in Tactica can only have 2 skills in total. While I understand why it's limited to 2 skills per persona, it does take away from the fun of fusion. The variety of skills and abilities personas can have seem far more limited than usual, so fusion is, I don't know what the exact word is, simpler? Yeah, let's just go with that. However, to the game's credit, the simplicity of the fusion and personas is balanced out by the rest of the combat, which offers all kinds of ways to dispatch enemies. It may not offer the most intricate gameplay the genre has ever seen, I wouldn't really know, but it does keep things fresh and interesting for the duration of the game. Most of the mechanics get a chance to shine during one of the many side quests, like this one where Arena must make it across the entire map within 1 turn by utilizing 1 Moors. To accomplish this, you must use your other 2 characters to position enemies in such a way that Arena can attack them and get an extra move. It's a really fun side quest and a great way to show just how much potential there is within this mechanic. I don't know how Tactica stacks up to other games in the genre, but as a newcomer to this kind of gameplay, I really enjoyed trying to execute each stage as efficiently as possible, which the game rewards. For what it is, I think Tactica does a great job keeping the gameplay fun and engaging throughout its runtime. Some of the classic Persona elements might not gel super well with the tactics gameplay, but it's never to a serious degree. Alright, so the gameplay is pretty good, but Persona games are also known for their stories. Personally, I think Strikers is no exception, and thankfully I can say the same about Tactica. The story actually takes place after the final boss of Persona 5, but before the protagonist leaves Tokyo at the end of the game, meaning it's almost a sequel but technically isn't. Doesn't really matter a ton though, because the game starts with the Phantom Thieves mysteriously transported to a bizarre land ruled by the ultimate bridezilla, Marie. She's a tyrant in a wedding dress with the power to control people's minds. Standing opposed to her is Arena, the revolutionist leader of the Rebel Corps. Naturally, she teams up with the Phantom Thieves to take back her home, and along the way, the gang come across Toshiro, a politician primed to be the next Prime Minister.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
Toshiro has a bizarre and unknown connection to Mare and the strange world they are all trapped in, and they must figure out why in order to escape. You get the idea. I'm not going to cover the whole story, but I will say that I quite enjoyed it overall. It does fall into some of the same traps as Strikers, particularly with the ending, but like Strikers, it's always nice to spend more time with these characters. I really liked Arena and Toshiro too, and they felt like great additions to the cast, and the chemistry between the characters never felt forced or unnatural, which was important because by the end of the game you realize that Tactica is actually a very personal story compared to some other games in the series. I was a little worried about them ending the game with the characters forgetting the whole thing happened as a way to explain why they never talk about it or whatever, like they did with a few of the other spin-offs, and I was really happy when that ended up not happening. I hate that kind of ending. It's a cop-out and makes the whole story feel pointless to me. The DLC with Akechi and Kasumi did that, but like, what else were they going to do there? Speaking of the DLC, I think it was a fun addition to the game, offering some new and compelling mechanics and story beats to engage with. I really liked the paint mechanic used, where different attacks and actions painted the ground around the battlefield. Enemies standing in your paint were always vulnerable, and vice versa. It was neat and offered something unique compared to the main game. The story there was also pretty good, and again, the character designs were great, specifically the bad guy. Just like the main game, it's a very personal story, but it is much shorter, so it doesn't hit as hard. But I still enjoyed it, even if the characters forget the whole thing in the end, which is lame. I do appreciate the fact that beating the DLC allows you to use Kasumi and Akechi in the main game, exclusive to New Game Plus, but still. I'm not the biggest fan of Day 1 DLC, and I still think DLC personas break progression a ton. But Tactica isn't the worst offender when it comes to this annoying ass industry practice, so whatever, I guess. People often accuse Atlas of milking Persona, specifically Persona 5 for all it's worth, and they aren't necessarily wrong, just look at the number of mobile game crossovers. However, to their credit, there hasn't been a Persona 5 spin-off that wasn't a good game in its own right, and I wholeheartedly believe Tactica is an example of that. Even if you just play it as an excuse to spend more time with characters you love, you are also going to have a well thought out and implemented fresh take on the Persona franchise. I'm totally fine with Atlas experimenting with new and unfamiliar genres if this is the kind of game we get out of it. If you're a fan of Persona 5, then you should check this out if you ever gets a chance. I wouldn't necessarily say it's worth full price because games are too expensive these days, so if you can snag it on sale, then do that. And yeah, that's been the 10 Max review of Persona 5 Tactica. Leave a like down below if you liked the video, and subscribe to the channel to see more. I am definitely going to be covering Persona 3 Reload when that comes out, so stick around for that. I'll probably end up doing a first impressions video along with a full review since the game is going to be real long and I gotta get in on that SEO as soon as possible. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in whatever we do next.